Best scene, the pardon. Fade in. Exterior, outside Nigel's cottage, day. Nigel, early 70s, a kindly man with a distinguished air, advances toward his picturesque cottage carrying a heavy shopping bag. As he does so, a young couple, Josh, early 20s, cover boy good looks, athletic build, and Valerie, early 20s, friendly and good-natured, emerge from the neighboring cottage and make for their car parked outside. They spot Nigel and walk up to him enthusiastically.
Hello, Mr. Frobisher. How's it going?
Not so bad, indeed.
We've had some good news, haven't we, Josh?
Looks like I finally made it into the league. I've been selected to play for Aston Villa.
Oh, that's excellent news. Well done.
He's going to be the next David Beckham, aren't you?
Shut up, Valerie.
Tell you what, I'll get some bubbly in, and you'll have to come over so we can toast your success.
Sounds like a good idea, Mr. Frobisher. Just let us know when's best for you.
Will do. It'll be nice to have some company now my dear wife's gone. Cheerio.
Nigel goes up to the door of his cottage and lets himself in. Josh and Valerie get into their car and drive off. Interior lounge in Nigel's cottage, evening. Time has passed. Nigel sits in his armchair with his dinner perched on a tray. He plays with the remains of his meal unenthusiastically. The television is on, but Nigel does not pay any attention. He places his tray on the floor and picks up his newspaper lying on a side table. He scans for interesting stories, and his eyes fall on an article entitled, Turing's Law, Oscar Wilde among 50,000 convicted gay men granted posthumous pardons. He reads the article completely engrossed, paying special attention to the sentence which reads, People who have died will be automatically pardoned. Nigel is intensely affected by the story. He switches the television off with his remote control and sits almost statuesque in deep contemplation. Flashback begins. Exterior, park, day, 1962. A chilly autumn day. Young Nigel, now in his early 20s with a rather shy, contained air, sits on a park bench reading a copy of the Daily Telegraph newspaper. On the front page is a story about the Cuban Missile Crisis. A short distance behind the bench is a deep wooded area. Young Nigel is apprehensive. He holds the newspaper almost like a prop for self-defense. Occasionally, he very furtively gazes over his shoulder at the wooded area. After a few beats, Freddie, early 20s, confident, self-assured, and exuding effortless charm, appears. He wears a pinstripe suit and carries a small briefcase. As he walks past, he clocks young Nigel. Young Nigel, lost in his shell, continues to read his paper and doesn't notice. Freddie walks on a little further, then stops in his tracks. He then slowly walks back and sits beside young Nigel on the other side of the bench in a relaxed, nonchalant manner. He takes out a cigarette, lights it, and draws a long, deep puff before blowing out. Young Nigel still doesn't notice Freddie. Freddie looks at the cover of young Nigel's paper. In order to draw his attention, Freddie clears his throat.
Very nasty business with the Cubans, don't you think?
Young Nigel shyly puts down his paper and looks at Freddie. There is an instant spark of attraction between the two.
That's putting it mildly.
I dare say President Kennedy will sort it all out.
I certainly hope so. It would be nice to see the world before it's obliterated by nuclear bombs.
Couldn't agree more.
I suppose individually there must be some decent Russians.
Absolutely. It's not the people who are wrong, it's the system, in my opinion. But then again, you might say that about ours, don't you think?
I'm not sure I'm with you.
Sorry, I'm disturbing you.
Goodness, no. Not at all.
There's a short silence. Young Nigel smiles timidly.
You come here often, do you, to read your newspaper?
Now and then. You?
I work nearby.
Doing what?
Well, I work for the government. I'm afraid I can't tell you anymore, otherwise I'd have to lock you up and throw away the key.
Young Nigel smiles.
And what do you do?
I'm an engraver. Watches and jewelry mostly.
Then you must have keen eyes and very steady hands.
Embarrassed, young Nigel is lost for words.
Thank you. People don't usually take much of interest when I tell them.
I'm Freddie, by the way.
Nigel.
After a few beats, a cruising gay teddy boy, late teens, appears. He gazes over at young Nigel and Freddie and shoots the latter a seductive smile. Young Nigel and Freddie look at each other, faintly amused. After a few beats, a gay, middle-aged businessman, early 40s, dressed in a suit, appears out of the wooded area. On seeing the teddy boy, he stops in his tracks and makes eye contact with him. The teddy boy returns the gaze and walks up to him. They both disappear together into the wooded area.
I suppose you've heard all about what goes on in the bushes over there, have you?
Young Nigel nods sheepishly.
Not my style. Frankly, I'd rather continue our conversation about the Cubans, if you'd like to.
Why not?
Then we should meet at the Lexington Club. Have you heard of it?
No.
I'm sure you'll like it. It'll certainly beat freezing your bottom off here.
Okay.
Freddie takes out a card.
Splendid. There's my card.
He hands the card to young Nigel.
Why don't we meet tonight for a drink? Say 7:30.
Why not?
Freddie gets up and starts to leave.
Oh, and be sure to mention my name.
Freddie marches off. Young Nigel watches him as he goes and smiles. Act present. Exterior garden evening. Nigel enters his garden carrying a torch and heads toward a rickety shed at the back of it. He opens the door and enters. Interior, Nigel's shed, evening. Nigel shines his torch around the shed to reveal cobwebs, garden tools, and a sprinkling of discarded bric-a-brac. Finally, the light falls on an old, battered shoebox concealed amidst the clutter. Nigel reaches forward and extracts it from the mess. He exits. Interior, lounge in Nigel's cottage, evening. Nigel enters carrying the shoebox. He sits down in his armchair and blows off a considerable layer of dust that has gathered on the lid. He removes the lid to reveal an assortment of old black and white photos and other memorabilia from the early 60s, including train tickets and a brush. He lifts up a large, striking black and white portrait photo of Freddie. Some of the other photos show the two men enjoying themselves on holiday. Nigel comes to an old scrawled note on paper that is browning at the edges. It is Freddie's farewell note. He pulls up a brush which still contains one of Freddie's hairs. He lifts the brush up to his face and smells it. Overcome with emotion, he places the brush back into the shoebox and picks up the large photo of Freddie. He places the shoebox to one side and walks up to the mantel shelf where he places the photo directly beneath a hanging framed photo of himself with his wife and daughter. He retrieves his newspaper, glances briefly at the article again, and then back at the photo of Freddie accusatively and angrily.
50 years too late.
He swipes the object on the mantel shelf off with a sharp wave of his hand. They come crashing to the floor. Flashback begins. Interior, young Nigel's bedsit, night, 1962. Young Nigel and Freddie enter young Nigel's sparsely furnished, rather messy bedsit.
I'm afraid the place is a bit of a mess.
Not at all. It reminds me of one of those bohemian artists' garrets.
No bohemian artist here, I'm afraid. Just a humble engraver.
Freddie smiles and pulls young Nigel to him. He gives young Nigel a passionate kiss, then gently starts peeling young Nigel's clothes off. Interior, young Nigel's bedsit, night, 1962. Young Nigel and Freddie are now naked and laying together on young Nigel's bed. Freddie kisses him passionately, and they share a moment of intense intimacy together. Young Nigel's face glows with pleasure. Interior, young Nigel's bedsit, day, 1962. Time has passed. It's now morning. Freddie and young Nigel are laying beside each other in bed.
What were you really doing in the park?
Isn't it obvious?
The way we were holding that newspaper, like a sort of shield?
Freddie laughs.
What about you?
Oh yes. I've been into the wooded area. Never with a copy of the Telegraph, though.
They laugh.
It's alright for a time, I suppose, but it can get a little tedious.
Will you be going back?
I prefer this.
He kisses young Nigel.
Don't you?
Young Nigel nods. Freddie gently runs his fingers through young Nigel's hair. Act present. Interior, Nigel's bedroom and cottage, night. Nigel is lying in his bed, trying to sleep. He tries different positions to relax, but none seem to work. He gets out of bed and grumpily plonks himself down on the end of it.
Damn you, Freddie!